The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow over the operations room. It wasn't the kind of room that demanded noise, no idle chatter, no jokes to break tension. Only the rustle of papers, the soft clink of gear being adjusted, and the low, steady hum of a projector filled the silence. In the center of the room, a large table was spread with maps, photos, and hastily marked circles drawn in red. The men gathered around it didn't need words to understand what those circles meant. Danger, uncertainty, and death lurking in the dark. Commander Harris stood at the head of the table, shoulders squared, his eyes scanning the group of operators. Seated before him, he wasn't one to waste words. Every syllable carried weight. His hand pressed down on the map, palm flat against the desert landscape rendered in faded colors. "Gentlemen," he began, voice steady, "this is not the kind of mission that waits for the right conditions. We move tonight. Intel suggests the target is moving through this corridor." His finger traced a line across the map. "And if we miss this window, we don't get another." The team listened, their expressions unreadable, though each man processed the words differently. They had been in situations like this before, missions rushed, risks towering, but something about the way the commander spoke made this one feel different. The urgency wasn't just in his tone. It was in the way his jaw clenched, the faint crease in his forehead. Lieutenant Brooks leaned forward, his gloved hands clasped. "Enemy strength?" he asked. His voice was low, professional, but the weight of the question hung heavy. "Unclear," Harris replied. "We've had reports of scattered insurgent fighters in the area. Could be a dozen. Could be 3 times that. Don't assume anything. They know the terrain. They've been waiting for us to make a move. And tonight, we're walking straight into their backyard." A murmur went through the room, not of fear but of acknowledgement. The men weren't reckless. They respected the enemy, respected the fight ahead. At the back of the room, Chief Petty Officer Ramirez checked the straps on his plate carrier, the Velcro tearing softly as he readjusted. His eyes lifted to the photos, pinned on the wall, grainy drone shots of narrow valleys and mud brick villages. He had been on enough missions to recognize the look of places where men didn't return. He said nothing, just tightened his gear, then looked back down at the map. Sergeant Cole, the team's medic, shifted in his chair. His pack, heavier than most, rested against the wall. He wasn't thinking about the map so much as the blood he'd likely see before dawn. His hands flexed unconsciously, remembering the weight of bandages and tourniquets, the sound of strained breathing in the dark. The projector flickered, showing live drone footage of the target area. Black and white shapes moved faintly across. The screen heat signatures, vehicles, buildings barely illuminated. The men studied it with intensity. Every angle, every shadow mattered. "Timeline?" Brooks asked again, eyes on Harris. 0100, Harris said firmly. "Your?" "Wheels up at 2,330. Insert deep inside the valley. From there, it's on foot. Keep it tight, keep it silent. Once you reach the ridgeline here," he tapped the map, "you'll have overwatch on the route. The target is expected between 010 and 0200. This isn't a capture mission. This is identification, disruption if necessary, and exfil. Understood?" The team nodded almost in unison. They didn't need dramatics or speeches. Orders were orders, and their lives had been built on following them. Still, the silence that followed was heavier than usual. Each man was left alone with his thoughts. They had all seen too much brothers lost, missions gone sideways, outcomes that haunted them long after the battlefield faded. And yet, they kept coming back, because the mission demanded it, because their country asked it, and because the man beside them depended on it. Harris's gaze swept across the room once more, lingering on each face. "I won't lie to you," he said quietly. "This isn't clean. Intel is shaky. We're going in with less than we'd like, but we don't get to choose the timing. We move, or we lose the trail." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I trust each of you to do what you've always done: adapt, fight smart, and bring each other home." The last part hit hardest. Bring each other home. It was a phrase they lived by, one that carried more weight than any medal or ribbon. Ramirez finally broke the silence. "We've been in worse," he muttered, a half-smile tugging at his lips. A few heads nodded, a faint ripple of relief passing through the room. The humor wasn't much, but it reminded them of who they were: men who faced the impossible and still walked into it headfirst. Weapons were laid out across the side table: M4 carbines with optics adjusted, suppressed pistols, night vision gear stacked neatly in rows. Each operator moved toward the gear, hands checking, loading, and securing with muscle memory built. Over years of repetition, magazines clicked into place. Knives slid into sheaths. Radios were tuned, frequencies checked. The ritual of preparation was as sacred as the mission itself. Cole checked his medical kit once more. He didn't like the look of its supplies, always felt too few, too light for what he knew they might face. He stuffed in an extra tourniquet, tucking it deep in the pack. Brooks slung his rifle, testing the weight. "How's it feel?" Ramirez asked. "Like it's ready to do the job," Brooks replied flatly. The clock ticked closer to departure. The air grew heavier, but not one man wavered. Each knew what was at stake. Each had made peace, in his own way, with the possibility that this night could be his last. Harris stood once more. "Final words?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Silence. Then Ramirez spoke again, voice steady, almost casual. "Let's get this over with." A low ripple of agreement followed. The men finished their preparations, checked each other's gear, and filed out of the briefing room. The night waited for them, vast and unrelenting, but they carried themselves with the calm of men who had already accepted it. As they stepped into the cool night air, the stars stretched endlessly above them, indifferent to what was about to unfold. The helicopter waited in the distance, blades beginning to turn, slicing through the stillness with growing urgency. One by one, the SEALs climbed aboard, their faces hidden behind night vision goggles, their bodies weighed down by gear, their minds sharpened to a razor's edge. The mission had begun, and there was no turning back. The last thing Harris said before the doors closed was barely audible over the rising roar of the rotors. "Bring each other home." The men nodded. Then the helicopter lifted into the dark, carrying them toward the unknown. The helicopter's rotors screamed against the night sky, tearing through the silence of the desert below. Inside the cabin, the SEAL team sat in absolute stillness, strapped in with their gear pressed tightly against their bodies. Red interior. Lights bathed their faces in a ghostly hue, turning them into shadows of themselves. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Each man was locked inside his own mind, running through the mission, replaying training drills, imagining the terrain waiting. Below, Commander Harris sat closest to the ramp, his helmet tilted slightly down, his gloved hand gripping the strap above his head. He didn't glance at his men, though he felt their eyes on him now and then. Leadership wasn't about barking orders, it was about being the anchor in the storm. And tonight, the storm was already rumbling. Chief Ramirez leaned back against the steel wall, his jaw clenched. He hated helicopters. Not the machines themselves. They were marvels of engineering, but the vulnerability. Suspended in the sky, roaring across open air, they were exposed targets. If anyone on the ground had a surface-to-air weapon, they'd be nothing more than streaks of fire falling through the dark. He shifted slightly, checking his rifle for the 100th time. Sergeant Cole's mind wandered differently. He wasn't thinking about the enemy yet. He was thinking about his med kit resting by his. Boots. He pictured bandages soaked in blood, needles in the dark, the weight of a teammate slumping against him while he tried to keep them alive. It was a curse of his role. While the others prepared to take life, he prepared to save it. And he knew tonight he would have to. He always did. The noise of the helicopter was overwhelming, but the team had long learned to find silence inside. They didn't fight the sound. They let it fade into the background until it became nothing more than a constant hum, like blood rushing in their ears. A tap on Harris's shoulder broke the rhythm. The crew chief leaned in, shouting over. The noise. 2 minutes. Harris gave a thumbs up, then turned his head slightly to the men. 2 fingers raised. 2 minutes. That was all they needed to know. The atmosphere changed instantly. Bodies straightened, hands tightened around weapons, eyes sharpened. Adrenaline seeped into their veins, not in a flood, but in a cold, steady trickle. The time for thought was ending. The time for action was seconds away. The helicopter dipped lower, and the red lights inside flicked off, plunging the cabin into near darkness. Only the faint glow of instrument panels painted green outlines. Across helmets and goggles, night vision devices clicked into place with soft snaps. The world shifted into eerie shades of green. Ramirez tapped Cole's arm, speaking with his hands now. Stay tight. Watch your corners. Cole nodded. The language of gestures was second nature. Words were unnecessary. The floor vibrated harder as the helicopter dropped altitude, slicing just above the ridgelines. Through the open ramp, the desert stretched endlessly, a vast ocean of black sand and jagged shadows. The moon was veiled by clouds, leaving the land darker than ink. Perfect for insertion. Perfect for ambush. The pilot's voice crackled faintly over the intercom. 90 seconds. LZ is hot. No one flinched at the word hot. It was never cold. Harris glanced at his watch. Every second ticked slower, dragging. Wait into the moment. He felt the eyes of his men shift toward him again, silently asking the same question. We ready? He gave the smallest nod. Always. The helicopter banked sharply, the sudden tilt pulling them sideways. Outside, the desert. Whipped by, wind and dust swirling violently as the bird descended. Then, with a final lurch, the skids kissed dirt. Go, go, go. The crew chief barked, though the seals were already moving before his words left his mouth. Harris hit the ground first, boots sinking into the loose sand. The rotor wash assaulted him, kicking up dust that stung his face. The others followed. In a fluid wave, weapons raised, scanning in every direction. They moved with the precision of men who had rehearsed this moment endlessly, though reality was never rehearsal. The helicopter lifted within seconds, vanishing into the dark sky, with its thunder fading into nothing. Silence dropped heavy and absolute. The desert seemed to inhale, swallowing the sound whole, leaving the team standing in a void so deep it felt unnatural. Ramirez adjusted his night vision, sweeping the area. Jagged rocks rose like broken teeth around them. The valley walls loomed. Higher, casting shadows even in the absence of light. Clear, he whispered into the radio, his voice almost ghost-like. The team formed up quickly, rifles trained outward, a 360-degree bubble of awareness. Harris raised his hand, signaling the direction. They moved. Boots pressed into sand with deliberate care, every step measured. The night magnified every sound. The scrape of gear, the crunch of gravel, even the shallow breath of men trying to stay silent. Their hearts beat hard, but their movements betrayed none of it. Through the green haze of night vision, the world looked alien. Rocks glowed faintly. Brush appeared as twisted skeletons. The ground stretched uneven, full of places where an enemy could crouch unseen. The seals moved like phantoms, their bodies low, weapons always at the ready. Minutes stretched into an hour as they pressed deeper into hostile territory. No voices spoke. Only the occasional whisper of radio updates passed between them, clipped and efficient. Cole noticed the silence of the world around them. No wind. No animals, not even the faint scurry of desert creatures. It was as if life itself had retreated, leaving only the seals and the unseen eyes that might already be tracking them. The deeper they moved, the heavier the air felt. Each man sensed it, that prickling unease, that instinct honed from years of survival. Something was wrong, but missions never felt right. That was the truth of war. At a bend in the valley, Harris raised a fist, and the team froze instantly. He scanned the ridgeline through his goggles, studying the jagged edge against the starless sky. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a shift, a flicker. But when he blinked, it was gone. Ramirez crouched low, whispering, "Could have been." "Nothing. Or it wasn't," Harris replied, his voice calm. They waited a beat longer, listening. The desert said nothing back. Harris finally gave the signal to move again. Step by step, the team slipped farther into the shadows. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked sharp, sudden, then cut off. The men froze again. Their eyes met through the glow of their goggles. It was a sound none of them liked. Villages were close. People were awake, and dogs never lied. They pressed on, every nerve stretched taut, every muscle coiled. The night was their ally, but it was also a predator, and it was watching. The desert night pressed down like a weight, silent yet suffocating. The seals moved with the discipline of shadows, every step measured, every sound absorbed by the sand beneath their boots. Through night vision goggles, the world was tinted, green and strange, as though they were ghosts wandering in a realm untouched by the living. The valley walls loomed taller the deeper they went, jagged cliffs casting endless shadows. To a man, they knew those shadows could hide enemies crouched. With rifles, waiting, the mission wasn't just about reaching the ridgeline. It was about surviving the journey to it. Commander Harris led the column, his hand occasionally rising to signal a halt or change of pace. He didn't speak, no one did, but his men read every gesture with practiced precision. A fist meant stop. 2 fingers pointed meant direction. An open palm pressed low meant crouch. They understood each other in silence, better than most men did in words. Chief Ramirez stayed near the rear, eyes scanning constantly. He carried the burden of knowing that enemies often came from behind. His rifle swept the ridges, pausing at every boulder, every unnatural shape. His gut tightened with each passing minute. Something about this place felt staged, like a set waiting for its actors to stumble into the trap. Sergeant Cole, the medic, stayed close to the middle. His eyes kept flicking to the injured man from Part 4, still alive in his imagination, though tonight no one had fallen yet. He felt the anticipation, the inevitability of it. He touched the pack on his back lightly, reassured by the weight of his medical kit. It was never enough, but it was all he had. Lieutenant Brooks, second in command, moved near Harris. He could feel the unease radiating from the men, even if no one voiced it. They all knew the silence was wrong. The desert was never truly still. Normally, there were faint winds carrying sand, the chirps of insects, the shuffle of nocturnal creatures. But tonight, nothing, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Then it happened, a sound faint but unmistakable. Clank, metal against metal. Not far. Harris froze mid-step. His fist shot up, and the entire team stopped instantly. Weapons raised, eyes darting through their NVGs. No one moved. The desert seemed to listen with them. Another sound followed, softer this time. A scrape, Ramirez whispered over Combs, voice low and measured. Someone's working something. Maybe a mag. Maybe a latch. Could be a trap, Brooks replied. The seconds stretched, long and suffocating. Harris made a decision. He gestured for the team to fan slightly, spreading out into cover among scattered rocks. Slowly, carefully, they advanced a few steps at a time, rifles trained forward. The sound stopped. Silence returned, thicker than before. Cole's breathing grew shallow. He wanted to wipe the sweat stinging his eyes, but forced himself to stay. Still, in the silence, even the scratch of a glove on skin could give them away. 5 minutes passed. 10. Nothing. Finally, Harris lowered his hand and gestured again. They resumed their slow progress, cutting deeper into the valley. The threat hadn't revealed itself, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. Every man carried it in his chest now, a phantom enemy stalking them through the dark. They passed through the ruins of an abandoned village, mud brick walls crumbling into piles of rubble. Doors hung broken on rusted hinges. Windows gaped empty, black as hollow eyes. Brooks signaled to clear it, and 2 operators peeled off, sweeping through the remains. Their movements were surgical quick peeks, angles covered, weapons steady. Within minutes, they returned, shaking their heads. Empty. Still, the feeling lingered. Too empty, too quiet. Villages like this were rarely left untouched in enemy territory. If fighters hadn't claimed it, why was it deserted? Ramirez muttered under his breath, barely audible. They're letting us in. No one replied, but they all felt the truth in it. The column moved on. Time blurred. Every step felt heavier, the valley narrowing as the cliffs closed in around them. The night air grew colder, biting through their gear. Breath fogged faintly, but even that seemed too loud. Cole noticed a door creak in the distance. It was faint, but his ears caught it. He stopped, eyes snapping toward a cluster of huts, half buried in the sand. Nothing moved, no shadow shifted. Yet the sound was real. Before he could signal, a dog barked, sharp, sudden, then silence. The team froze again. Harris's jaw tightened. He gave the signal, move faster. They were being tracked. The pace quickened, though still careful. Every man scanned harder now, rifles sweeping every angle. Tension stretched them thin, yet they held it. They were SEALs fear didn't rule them. It sharpened them. Then came another sound, closer this time. Not metal. Not wood. Footsteps. The men dropped low instantly, forming a crouched line behind. Rocks and broken walls. Harris raised his hand, signaling to hold. The footsteps crunched faintly on gravel, moving parallel to them, just beyond sight. Brooks leaned toward Harris, whispering into Combs, "Flank patrol?" "Could be," Harris murmured back. The footsteps stopped. Silence again. Ramirez's finger tightened on his trigger. He could almost feel the enemy just beyond the edge of his scope, hidden perfectly in the dark. But firing blind wasn't an option. Discipline held him steady. Minutes ticked by. Finally, the footsteps faded, vanishing into the night. The team didn't move for nearly 5 minutes more. Patience was survival. Only when Harris signaled again did they rise and continue. But now, the quiet wasn't just eerie, it was oppressive. The desert itself seemed hostile, pressing against them from every direction. Cole whispered into the radio, unable to stop himself. "Feels like we're being herded." No one disagreed. The valley bent again, narrowing into a choke point. Between cliffs, the perfect place for an ambush. Harris studied it through his NVG, his gut screaming. But there was no alternate route, no time to circle wide. He turned to Brooks, speaking low. "We push through. Fast. If they're waiting, we hit hard and keep moving. Brooks nodded grimly. Harris raised his hand, signaling the advance. The team tightened formation, rifles sweeping high and low. They moved into the choke point, every sense screaming. Rocks towered above them like giants. Shadows stretched unnaturally long. Halfway through, Ramirez whispered, "Eyes. Top left." "Ridge." Everyone froze. Harris aimed upward, scanning the ridge through his scope. For a heartbeat, he saw nothing. Then a flicker. Ahead, a glint of glass? He couldn't be sure. Contact? Brooks asked softly. Harris hesitated. The figure was gone. A silence mocked them. "Not yet," Harris said finally. His voice was steady, but his stomach twisted. They pushed forward again, hearts pounding, weapons tighter in their hands. Every step carried the weight of inevitability. The silence was no longer just quiet. It was a promise. And it was about to be broken. The choke point narrowed until the cliffs seemed to press in on the seals like closing jaws. Every man felt it in his bones. The valley was wrong, too quiet, too perfect for a kill zone. Still, there was no other way forward. Harris raised his hand, urging speed. The team moved in a staggered line, rifles angled high, eyes hunting the ridges. Then it began. The first shot cracked like thunder, shattering the silence. A round slammed into the dirt inches from Brooks' boot, spraying sand. Instantly, muzzle flashes erupted along the ridge. Dozens of them. Tracers streaked through the night like burning comets. Contact, left ridge. Ramirez shouted, already returning fire. His M4 barked in rapid bursts, each shot precise, controlled. The team dove for cover, scrambling behind rocks and boulders. The valley lit up with gunfire, the green glow of night vision filling their goggles with chaos. Dust and sparks sprayed everywhere as bullets hammered stone. Cole slid behind a boulder, adrenaline roaring through his veins. His medic's instinct warred with the need to fight. He returned fire, short bursts aimed at the muzzle flashes above, then ducked as rounds sparked inches from his helmet. Push right flank. Harris barked through combs, his voice calm but forceful. He leaned out, squeezing off rounds with surgical precision. Two figures crumpled on the ridge, but more took their place, shadows darting from cover to cover. Brooks signaled two operators and broke right, moving low and fast. They fired as they ran, the noise deafening in the narrow valley. The ambush was heavy, but the SEALs were disciplined. They didn't panic. They fought like a machine. Then a scream tore through the combs. One of the men, a younger operator named Daniels, dropped, clutching his side. Blood poured through his fingers, dark even under NVG. He gasped, writhing as rounds cracked above him. "Man down!" Cole shouted, already moving. He slid across the sand, throwing himself beside Daniels. Bullets snapped past his head, but he barely noticed. His hands tore open his pack, pulling gauze, tourniquet, everything at once. Daniel's voice was weak, choked. "I'm fine." "Keep going. Shut up," Cole growled, pressing gauze into the wound. Blood soaked instantly. He cinched a tourniquet high on the leg, twisting it until Daniels hissed in pain. "Stay with me? Don't you close your eyes." Ramirez covered them, firing in steady bursts, brass casing after casing clattering into the dirt. "Cole, hurry the hell up." "I'm not letting him bleed out," Cole snapped, his hands moving with brutal speed. His gloves were slick with blood already. Overhead, the insurgents shifted fire, pouring more rounds down into the valley. Rocks exploded as bullets chewed into them. The enemy had the high ground, the numbers, and the element of surprise. Harris knew it instantly. This wasn't a skirmish. It was an attempt to pin them, bleed them out, and finish them in the dark. He keyed his radio. "Command? This is Alpha 1. Troops in contact. Heavy fire. Grid coordinates transmitting now. We need immediate support. Over. Static hissed, then a voice cracked through. Alpha 1, negative. Air support unavailable. Ground QRF is 4 hours out minimum. You're on your own. Harris' jaw clenched. 4 hours might as well be 4 years. He ducked as a round ricocheted inches above his head, then barked orders. Suppressive fire. Shift left. We break this kill zone now. Brooks led the push, firing controlled bursts, every shot angled upward. His men moved in pairs, one firing, one advancing. The tactic was muscle memory, drilled into them 1,000 times. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and dust. Shadows flitted along the ridge, insurgents yelling in a language the SEALs couldn't hear clearly over the roar of battle. Ramirez dropped one with a clean shot to the chest. Another went. Down moments later, tumbling from the ridge into the valley below. Still, more muzzle flashes erupted. There were too many. Cole dragged Daniels into deeper cover, his hands still pressing hard against the wound. I've slowed the bleed, but he needs evac, he called out. Harris didn't answer. He couldn't. Evac wasn't coming. The firefight raged for what felt like hours, but was only minutes. Bullets cracked overhead, dirt sprayed, and every man lived second to second. Yet, despite the chaos, the SEALs began to claw back control. Their training, their precision, it turned the ambush into a contest of skill rather than numbers. Harris shifted his rifle, sighted carefully, and squeezed. Another fighter crumpled. Brooks lobbed a grenade toward a cluster of muzzle flashes. The explosion lit the ridge, scattering debris and silence in its wake. The enemy fire faltered, not ending, but less coordinated now. The ambush had lost its initial ferocity. Push, now. Harris shouted. The SEALs surged forward, breaking through the narrow choke point, guns blazing. They moved as one covering, advancing, covering again. Step by step, they fought out of the trap. Finally, the last of the valley opened into a wider clearing. The gunfire tapered. The ridges behind them glowed faintly from smoke and fire. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Cole knelt beside Daniels, checking the wound again. Blood soaked through the gauze, sticky and hot. Daniels' breathing was ragged, shallow. He was conscious, but barely. We need to get him out, Cole said, his voice urgent. Harris crouched beside them, his face grim. He glanced at Daniels, then at the rest of his men. Dust coated their gear, sweat streaked their faces, but their eyes burned with determination. He keyed the radio again, his voice low and hard. Command, this is Alpha 1. We have one critically wounded. Extraction window? The reply came after a long pause. Alpha 1, negative. LG are compromised. You'll have to hold until morning. Morning. That meant hours of waiting, hours of fighting, hours of bleeding. Harris closed his eyes for the briefest moment, then opened them with steel. Copy. Alpha 1 out. He looked at his men. We dig in here, ammo check. Secure the perimeter. They're not finished with us yet. Ramirez spat into the dirt, then reloaded. Let them come. Cole pressed another bandage into Daniel's wound, his hands trembling only slightly. He forced his voice calm. You're gonna be fine. Just stay awake. Stay with me. Daniels tried to smile, but coughed instead, blood flecking his lips. The team set their defenses, forming a 360-degree circle around the clearing. The night pressed close, shadows shifting with menace. They had survived the first wave. But Harris knew, deep in his gut, that the enemy wasn't done. The desert wasn't finished with them. And dawn was a lifetime away. The clearing was quiet now, but it wasn't peace. It was the sharp, Suffocating kind of silence that came after chaos, the kind that felt alive with menace. Smoke lingered faintly in the air, drifting from scorched rocks on the ridges. The smell of gunpowder clung to their gear, burned into their skin. Every man knew the fight wasn't over. This was just the pause before the next storm. The SEALs crouched in a tight perimeter, scanning outward into the night. Their rifles stayed leveled, eyes behind NVGs searching the shadows for any flicker of movement. The cliffs loomed all around, jagged and dark, and in those shadows, the enemy could be watching, waiting. "Ammo check," Harris said, his voice low but firm. One by one, the men replied. "Half mags here, 2 left there." A handful of grenades. The numbers were bad, too bad. Barely 50% across the board, Brooks reported grimly. He tapped the side of his magazine pouch. "And that's if we don't burn through it too fast." Harris nodded once. His face gave nothing away, but inside, he felt the weight of the math. Ammunition wasn't just bullets, it was time. Time they no longer had. Cole crouched over Daniels, who lay propped against a rock, pale and sweating. The medic's gloves were soaked dark with blood, his kit scattered across the ground like the contents of a surgeon's table. He had slowed the bleeding, but it hadn't stopped. Daniel's chest rose shallow, uneven. "How is he?" Harris asked quietly, crouching beside them. Cole shook his head. "Stable for now, but he needs evac. He's lost too much already. He's not gonna make it if we sit here all night." Harris glanced at Daniels. The young operator's eyes fluttered open, finding his commander. He tried to speak, but no sound came. His lips moved anyway. "Don't stop." Harris gave him a nod, the kind that carried a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. Around them, the men settled into defensive positions. Ramirez took the high ground on a boulder, scanning with his scope. Brooks paced slowly behind the line, checking each sector, each man. The discipline never faltered, but the exhaustion was setting in. Sweat soaked through their gear, stinging their eyes. Muscles ached from tension. And above all, the relentless awareness that they were outnumbered, cut off and running low. A sudden crack echoed in the distance. A single shot, then silence. The men froze, rifles snapping to the sound. Nothing followed. No muzzle flash, no movement. Just a reminder that the desert wasn't empty. "They're probing us," Ramirez muttered, eyes still on the scope, testing how we react. "They'll come again," Brooks added. Harder. They all knew it. Minutes dragged into an hour. The SEALs held their positions, every nerve stretched thin. The desert night grew colder, the air sharp against their skin. Time crawled, each second heavy, amplified by the silence. Every crack of stone settling, every whisper of wind sounded like footsteps, like danger creeping closer. Cole worked in the dark, his hands never leaving Daniels. He whispered steady reassurances, though they were as much for himself as for the wounded man. "You're good. Just hang in. We're not done. You'll see the sunrise." Daniel's eyes opened faintly. A flicker of a smile on his bloodied lips. He tried to speak again, but Cole hushed him. "Save it. Talk later. Right now, you breathe." The comms hissed softly in Harris's ear. No new orders. No promise of early relief. Just static. He glanced at the sky still black, with hours until dawn. The men's water supply was dwindling. Fast, Ramirez took a cautious sip from his canteen, then passed it along without a word. Each man drank sparingly, a mouthful at most, before handing it on. It was ritual, not luxury. The hunger gnawed at them too, but rations meant nothing in a firefight. The real hunger was for rest, for silence that wasn't dangerous, for the relief of knowing someone else was coming to take over. But no one was. Harris moved along the line, crouching beside each man. He didn't ask if they were good. He already knew the answer. They weren't, but they would hold. That was all. That mattered. The first probing attack came an hour later. Shadows moved along the ridge, faint figures silhouetted against the stars. A burst of gunfire erupted, wild but close enough to force the SEALs down. Muzzle flashes winked from above, short controlled bursts this time. Contact right. Brooks barked, returning fire. His rounds snapped through the dark, forcing the enemy back into cover. Ramirez squeezed off 3 sharp shots, dropping a figure mid-step. The body tumbled down the slope, vanishing into the black. "Cease fire, Harris," ordered after a minute. The gunfire stopped, but their ears rang in the silence. The probing had lasted less than 2 minutes, but it had cost them precious rounds. "They're counting us," Ramirez muttered, "seeing how many shooters answer back." "And how fast we burn ammo," Brooks added darkly. The men shifted, reloaded, checked their sectors again. The silence returned, heavier now, pregnant with the knowledge that the enemy wasn't gone. Cole whispered into the radio, not to command but to the team. "Daniel's pulse is weak. He's fading." "Keep him alive," Harris said firmly. "That's all you focus on." Cole didn't answer, just bent over his patient again, pressing harder on the wound, whispering through gritted teeth. Hours dragged on. The desert felt endless, timeless. The men fought fatigue with sips of water, clenched jaws, and sheer willpower. Their ammo count shrank, each round fired measured against survival. Another probing attack came, then another. Small bursts of fire, here and gone, forcing the SEALs to respond, to waste rounds. Each skirmish was brief, but draining, pulling. At their focus, stretching their endurance thinner and thinner. By the 4th, Ramirez muttered bitterly, "They're bleeding us dry." And it was true. Every magazine felt heavier with meaning now. Every round fired was one less chance to see the morning. Harris crouched behind cover, staring into the endless dark. His men were still alive, still holding. But he could see the fatigue etched into their faces, the way their movements slowed, the quiet despair lurking beneath the discipline. He keyed his mic. His voice was low, steady, but the words carried the truth of their situation. "Stay sharp, stay together. We've got nothing left to waste, so we fight smart. We fight quiet, and we fight until dawn." The men nodded in. Silence, rifles gripped tighter. The night stretched on, merciless and unbroken. And somewhere in the shadows, the enemy was waiting for the moment when the SEALs' last round would fall. The night had grown colder, the desert air sharp and dry. A pale moon hung low, casting long shadows across the rocks where the SEALs had dug in. They were little more than dark shapes against darker terrain, tired men clinging to discipline, their rifles resting heavy in their hands. Hours of fighting had stripped them to the bone. Their magazines were thin, water almost gone, strength wearing down to its last threads. But still, they held. Brooks crouched beside a jagged boulder, eyes scanning the ridgeline through his NVGs. "No movement," he whispered, though the words didn't comfort anyone. No movement meant nothing. It just meant the enemy was waiting. Harris leaned against a rock, his shoulders sagging under the weight of command. His men looked to him for strength, but even he was running on fumes. His throat was raw from shouting commands through bursts of gunfire. His hands trembled faintly when he reloaded, though he hid it as best he could. They had survived another probing attack less than an hour ago. Short, sharp bursts of enemy fire had forced them down, and the SEALs had answered with precious rounds. But Harris could feel the trap tightening. The insurgents weren't trying to overrun them yet. They were trying to break them piece by piece, strip them of ammo, bleed away their strength. Daniels was still alive, barely. Cole knelt beside him, working tirelessly, whispering encouragements into his ear, even as his hands pressed down on blood-soaked bandages. The young operator's skin was pale, his lips cracked. His eyes fluttered open every so often, only to roll shut again. His life was a flickering candle, threatening to snuff out with every shallow breath. Ramirez sat a few feet away, staring out into the dark, his sniper rifle resting across his lap. His eyes were sunken, haunted. "They'll come again," he said, his voice flat. "It's what I do. Wait till we're dry, then hit us hard." Nobody disagreed. The silence stretched long, broken only by the faint hiss of the radio. In Harris's ear, for hours, command had been little more than static. The mountains blocked signals, and the insurgents jammed what they could. The lifeline to higher command was fraying, just like everything else. Finally, a voice crackled through the static. Distant, faint, but unmistakable. "Bravo team? Status?" Over. The men froze, listening. Even Daniel's eyes flickered open at the sound. A lifeline. Harris keyed the mic, his finger heavy on the push to talk. He hesitated, glancing at his men. Their faces were streaked with dirt and sweat, eyes hollow from exhaustion. They looked back at him, waiting. What could he say? That they were holding strong? That they'd see this through? Lies wouldn't help them now. He pressed the mic again. His voice was low, steady, but weighted with truth. "Command. This is Bravo. We've got nothing left." The words hung heavy in the night. Silence answered. Just static, faint, and cruel. No reassurance. No promise of reinforcements. Just the hiss of the void. Brooks lowered his head, staring at the dirt. Ramirez cursed under his breath, shaking. His head. Cole kept working on Daniels, though his shoulders slumped as if the words had stolen something from him. Harris closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. Speaking the truth had cost him more than he'd expected. A commander's job was to keep hope alive, even when there was none. But lies could only carry them so far. His men deserved the truth. He opened his eyes and spoke quietly, not into the radio, but to his team. "You've all done more than anyone could ask. Whatever happens next, we've already won. We stood our ground. We didn't break." Ramirez gave a humorless chuckle. "Feels a lot like losing to me, sir." "It's not," Harris said firmly. "They wanted us to fold. We didn't. That matters." The men fell silent again, letting the words sink in. They weren't comforted exactly, but they clung to the sentiment like a rope in deep water. A distant crack of gunfire echoed across the ridge, followed by another. The men ducked low, rifles snapping to their shoulders. Harris scanned the horizon, heart pounding, but no round struck near. It was taunting fire again, reminders that they were surrounded, hunted. The minutes dragged. Fatigue pressed heavier with each passing second. Brooks rubbed his eyes and forced them open. Ramirez shifted uncomfortably, his muscles twitching from strain. Even Harris felt his head nod once, his body begging for sleep. But sleep here meant death. Cole's whisper cut through the silence. "He's gone cold." The men turned toward him. Daniels lay motionless now, his chest rising only in shallow stutters. Cole's hands trembled as he tried to stimulate him, pressing down harder, whispering fiercely, "Stay with me. Stay with me." Daniel's eyes flickered once, finding Cole's, then closed. His body went still. Cole froze. His hands hovered above the chest of his fallen brother, unwilling to accept it. Then, slowly, he sat back, bloodied gloves trembling. In the moonlight, no one spoke. The silence pressed down heavier than gunfire. Finally, Harris lowered his head. "We'll take him home." "That's a promise." The team absorbed the loss in silence. There was no time for mourning, no ceremony. Just a quiet resolve that their brother's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. Hours stretched on. The SEALs fought to stay awake, to stay ready, each man forcing his weary body to obey. Their ammo was nearly gone now. Some carried only half mags, others just a few rounds. Harris himself had 2 full magazines, left 60 rounds that might as well have been 60 seconds on a clock, counting down. The radio crackled again. A voice, faint and broken through static. "Bravo, hold position. Reinforcements moving. ETA, dawn. Hold." The men froze, listening. Dawn. Hours away still, but something to cling to. Ramirez muttered, "We just have to live that long." Brooks nodded grimly. Easier said than done. Harris didn't key the mic again. He didn't need to. They knew what had to be done. He looked at his men, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief. "We hold," he said quietly. "That's all. Doesn't matter how. Doesn't matter what it costs. We hold," the men nodded. The silence returned, thicker than ever. Somewhere in the darkness, the enemy waited. The SEALs crouched low, rifles ready, hearts pounding. And in the cold desert night, the words Harris had spoken still echoed among them. "We've got nothing left." They all knew it was true. But still, they would fight. The desert night was alive with silence, that strange kind of silence that presses on the skin like weight. Every breath, every heartbeat felt too loud. The SEALs crouched low among the rocks, their weary bodies tense, waiting for an attack they knew would come. Harris scanned the ridgeline again, NVGs painting the world in ghostly green. Nothing moved, nothing stirred. Yet he could feel it, the prickling sense of being watched, stalked. It was the kind of instinct honed by years of combat, a sixth sense no training manual could explain. Then it came. The crack of a rifle split the night sharp, surgical, deadly. Ramirez collapsed first, his head snapping back as the round tore through his helmet. His body slumped against the rocks without a sound. "Sniper," Brooks hissed, dragging himself down against the dirt. The SEALs scrambled for cover, pressing themselves tight to stone as Harris shouted orders. "Stay low. Don't silhouette yourselves." His voice was steady, but inside, dread clawed at him. The sniper had waited, patient and cruel, striking when fatigue had dulled their edges. Ramirez was one of their sharpest eyes, and now he was gone in an instant. Cole gritted his teeth, pulling Daniel's lifeless body closer to shield it, as if protecting him even in death. Brooks lay flat, his rifle clutched tight, scanning blindly through his scope. But the night offered no target, only endless shadows. "Where is he?" Brooks whispered. "Far," Harris muttered. "Has to be. He's picking his shots." Another crack. A bullet sparked against stone inches from Harris's face, showering him with fragments. He ducked lower, heart hammering. The sniper was toying with them. Minutes dragged, stretched thin by fear. Every man flinched at the slightest sound. Rocks shifting, fabric brushing. Even the faint clink of metal felt like a beacon calling out to death. Cole finally whispered, his voice harsh with desperation. "We can't sit here. He'll pick us off one by one." Harris thought fast, brain burning through exhaustion. He'd seen snipers work before. Patience was their weapon. Fear was their ally. The longer they stayed frozen, the more likely panic would break them. "Smoke grenades," Harris said, reaching for his vest. He pulled one free, yanked the pin, and tossed it over the rocks. It hissed to life, spilling a white cloud that drifted across the desert floor. "Move positions," Harris ordered. "Now!" The men crawled, bellies scraping dirt, shifting carefully from cover to cover. The smoke was thin, but it gave them something an edge, however small. Still, the sniper waited. Another shot cracked, this one striking Brooks in the arm. He grunted, dropping his rifle, but Cole grabbed him, dragging him deeper into the rocks. Blood soaked Brooks' sleeve, hot and fast. He clenched his teeth, refusing to cry out. Cole's hands worked quickly, pressing a tourniquet above the wound. "You're good. Stay with me," he muttered. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the fear. Harris pressed his back against a boulder, breathing hard. The sniper had eyes like a hawk. He was disciplined, patient, skilled. Not a random insurgent with a rifle. This was a professional, and he was hunting them. The team huddled low, breaths ragged. No one dared raise their head above cover. The night was endless, each second stretching into eternity. The sniper didn't need to rush. He had all the time in the world. Harris's mind churned. He had to break the cycle, force the shooter into a mistake. He signaled to Cole, pointing toward a cluster of rocks 20 meters away. Cole nodded, understanding instantly. He grabbed a helmet from Ramirez's lifeless body, tied it to a stick, and slowly raised it above the boulder. The response was instant. Crack! The helmet spun off the stick. A hole punched clean through the center. "There," Brooks hissed, pointing toward the ridge. He'd seen the flash, just a sliver of light, but enough. Harris didn't hesitate. He lifted his rifle, aimed at the spot, and fired 3 rapid shots. The sound echoed, but no cry came. Had he hit? Had the sniper moved? The silence returned, thicker than before. The men stayed crouched, waiting, hearts pounding. Minutes passed, dragging like hours. Harris's trigger finger ached from tension. Then, another shot. The round slammed into the dirt between Cole and Brooks, spraying them with sand. The sniper was still there, still watching, still waiting. Brooks slammed his fist against the ground, frustration boiling over. "We're sitting ducks, sir." "I know," Harris snapped, though his tone was more weary than harsh. They couldn't run. They couldn't fight what they couldn't see. Their ammo was dwindling, their strength nearly gone. The sniper was a ghost, invisible in the dark, striking with impunity. And yet, they couldn't give up. Cole's voice broke the silence. "If we make it to dawn, reinforcements will spot him. He won't own the day like he owns the night." Harris looked at him, seeing the truth. Dawn was their only hope. They just had to survive until then. But the hours between now and sunrise stretched endlessly. The SEALs rotated shifts, each man forcing his body to stay awake, eyes locked on the ridgeline. Fear gnawed at them, but discipline held them together. They whispered quietly, reassuring one another, grounding themselves in the bond they shared. Time dragged. Another shot rang out, missing them by inches. The sniper was reminding them he was still there, still watching, still in control. Brooks whispered bitterly, "Feels like he's already won." "No," Harris said firmly. "He only wins if we break, and we're not breaking." The men clung to his words, thin as they were. The night crawled on, each second an eternity. Fear sat heavy in their chests, but resolve held their bodies steady. They were SEALs. They were brothers. And they would not give the sniper the satisfaction of seeing them fold. Still, deep down, each of them knew the truth. Survival was no longer in their hands. It belonged to the dawn. And the sniper wasn't finished yet. The night stretched on like a punishment, endless and cruel. Every second ticked by with the slow weight of eternity, and still the sniper watched from his hidden perch. The SEALs, battered and bleeding, crouched among the rocks, refusing to give him another easy kill. Their world had shrunk to shadows, whispers, and a faint taste of dust on their tongues. Every muscle burned from holding still, every nerve screamed for rest, but no one dared close his eyes. Sleep meant death. Movement meant death. All that remained was endurance. Harris checked his watch. The glowing hands mocked him only 2:47. Dawn was hours away. He pressed his forehead against the rock, closing his eyes for the briefest moment, then opened them again. He couldn't falter. His men needed him. Cole shifted beside him, his voice a quiet rasp. Brooks is fading. Blood loss is worse than we thought. Harris glanced over. Brooks was pale, his arm bound tight with a tourniquet, lips trembling as he tried to stay conscious. His breathing came in shallow gasps, but when his eyes flickered open, he forced a weak grin. "Don't bury me yet," Brooks whispered. Cole tightened his grip on his brother's shoulder. "Not tonight. Not if we've got anything to say about it." The sniper's silence was its own weapon. Hours had passed since the last shot, but none of them believed he was gone. He was out there, watching, studying, waiting for fatigue to betray them. Harris knew the tactic fear was more powerful than bullets. The man behind that rifle wasn't just killing bodies. He was trying to kill their will. But will was all they had left. The wind shifted, carrying a chill that cut through sweat-soaked uniforms. The desert could burn by day and freeze by night, a cruel balance that punished weakness. Harris pulled his scarf tighter and forced his mind to stay sharp. He thought of Ramirez's body, lying still just feet away, his lifeless eyes staring upward. He thought of the families waiting back home, wives and children who would never hear these men's voices again. He swallowed hard, forcing the thoughts. "Down. We just need the light," he muttered to himself. "Hold until light." The others didn't respond, but they didn't need to. Each of them clung to the same fragile hope. Hours crawled. At times, Harris swore he heard footsteps in the distance, the crunch of gravel, the whisper of cloth. But no figure emerged. No enemy revealed himself. Only the desert, endless and cruel, stretching out in silence. Then crack. The bullet slammed into the stone near Cole's head, splintering rock into his face. He dropped lower, cursing under his breath. "He's still there," Cole growled, wiping blood from a shallow cut on his cheek. "Still waiting." "Then so are we," Harris replied, steady but tight. The shot was a reminder, a taunt. The sniper could have killed Cole, but he hadn't. He wanted them to know he was in control. Minutes bled into hours. Each man battled exhaustion, their bodies screaming for rest. Brooks slipped in and out of consciousness, whispering half-formed words that no one could make sense of. Cole pressed him to stay awake, shaking him gently, murmuring encouragement like a brother. At last, Harris noticed the faintest change. The black sky above them wasn't quite as absolute as before. A subtle gray began to bleed into the horizon. His chest tightened. "Dawn's coming," he whispered. The others lifted their heads just enough to see. The eastern edge of the sky glowed faintly, a promise of relief. The night was breaking, but dawn also meant exposure. The sniper would see them clearer now, outlines sharpened by growing light. The SEALs crouched lower, knowing the danger wasn't over. If anything, the final hour could be the most lethal. The silence stretched. Every nerve bristled with anticipation. A glow on the horizon brightened, painting the desert in cold hues of gray and silver. Shapes emerged where shadows had been, ridges and rocks sharpening into focus. Then, movement. Harris saw at first a flicker on the ridge, just a shift in contrast, but enough. He raised his rifle, eyes narrowing through the scope. For the first time all night, he saw the silhouette of their tormentor. The sniper lay prone, perfectly camouflaged, his rifle fixed on their position. A ghillie suit blended him into the rocks, almost invisible, but now the light betrayed him. "Got him," Harris whispered. His finger tightened on the trigger. But before he could fire, the ground shook. The distant thump of helicopter blades rolled across the desert. Reinforcements. The sniper's head jerked toward the sound. For a split second, his concentration faltered. Harris didn't hesitate. He squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, cutting through the dawn. The silhouette jolted, then slunked. The rifle slid from the sniper's hands, tumbling down the ridge. For the first time in hours, the desert was silent, truly silent. Harris exhaled, lowering his weapon. The sniper was finished. The helicopters swept in, kicking up sand as they descended. Reinforcements poured out, weapons ready, eyes wide at the sight of the battered survivors. Medics rushed forward, pulling Brooks onto a stretcher, covering Ramirez's body with a tarp. Cole leaned against the rocks, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. He looked at Harris, his eyes glassy. "We made it." Harris nodded slowly. "Not all of us." The words hung heavy in the air. No victory, no celebration, only the bitter weight of survival. As the sun rose higher, painting the desert gold, the SEALs were lifted into the helicopters. Wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of dust and smoke. The landscape below shrank, a battlefield that would never leave their memories. Harris stared out the window, watching the ground fall away. Ramirez's face haunted him. Brooks's weak grip still clung to his hand. Cole sat slumped, silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon. They had endured the night. They had survived the sniper's hunt. But the cost was carved into their souls, deeper than any wound. The transmission replayed in Harris's mind, a ghost he couldn't shake. "We've got nothing left." He knew those words would follow him forever. When the helicopters touched, down at base, commanders and medics surrounded them. Reports would be written, medals awarded, stories spun for the public. But none of it would capture the truth. The truth was in the silence, the fear, the unrelenting patience of a single sniper. In the dark, the truth was in the brothers they carried home beneath flags. As the sun rose higher, Harris closed his eyes, the weight of it all pressing down. They had survived. But survival did not feel like victory. It felt like loss. And yet, in that loss, there was something unbreakable, the bond of men who refused to surrender, who stood together when there was nothing left. That was the legacy. That was the truth.